Welcome to Go Green Radio, everybody. So glad that you could tune in today. We've got a great guest and a great topic, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today. In a world where companies are being fined, investigated, and sometimes publicly shamed for sustainability claims, getting things catastrophically wrong as a brand, we have Helen Neal. She is the person behind the scenes helping household names get it right. Helen Neal is coming to us today. She has built an AI platform to help stop brands from accidentally greenwashing. And we're going to go into great detail about what that means and how she does it. So without further ado, welcome to Go Green Radio, Helen. We are so glad to have you on the show.
I am so happy to be here, Jill. Thank you so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. Now, some of our listeners may be new to the term greenwashing. Can you help us understand what that term means?
Of course, it's very simple actually. The term greenwashing essentially just means that any form of environmental claim that if you don't have evidence to back up the claim that you're making, or you're trying to make that claim sound a little bit more exciting and a little bit more interesting without the evidence to back it up, that is essentially what greenwashing is.
Why is that a temptation for brands? What might cause a company or a brand to engage in greenwashing, even if they don't mean to?
So in all honesty, I really think that the vast majority of businesses do not intend to greenwash. They don't set out to mislead their consumers. They don't intend to get a reputational slap on the hand or a regulatory fine. It is not their intention. But I think there are lots of things happening that cause these organizations to trip up. And that's essentially what's going on. I think the first thing is a bit of a structural problem within our corporate environments, within our corporate businesses. If you think about it, you've got marketing teams, corporate affairs teams, sustainability teams, all working in these separate silos. Yet, in order to not greenwash, you need all of those factions working together, including your legal department as well. What's happening at the moment is for a lot of the kind of sustainability teams who are doing all the number crunching and getting all of that great data, putting it into their reports and into their sort of investor relations and their press releases, they're bringing all of that information over to their comms teams. And their comms teams are taking that information, but they're looking at it obviously in a lens which is much more about how do we put our business in the best light, put our business the best foot forward. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, with an organization, you want to put your best foot forward and put yourself in the best light. It's always been done that way, and we understand that. But what's happening is if you adopt that principle when it comes to sustainability, it's at that moment where a lot of businesses are getting tripped up because they are taking a lot of that sustainability information, cutting it down, making the claim sound a little bit more exciting, not putting the evidence in to back it up, and that's when they're getting caught.
That makes perfect sense because it's very possible that maybe the comms team hasn't been trained in the legal ease of sustainability reporting. And so I know we're going to get to that in just a little bit. But how can AI help? Talk to us about what you've developed with Zena.
So Zena is essentially an AI platform tool, and it's very simple. It is there to support a sustainability team or a corporate affairs team once they've got all of that great data and information and they're drafting out their stories, they're putting together their content. It's at that point you want to put that data and that information through our tool, through the Zena tool. And what the tool essentially does is it looks and it scans for that information, it checks it against a range of global regulations, and it will identify where you might be at risk from a regulatory point of view. Then, in addition to that, once you identify that risk, it will then give you some coaching around the things you need to think about in order to improve that language. It also gives you a score. And so that score, you can then move that score up so that you improve that score every time you make some adjustments to that language so that you're making it better, essentially. So that coaching will tell you things like, you don't seem to have any verification data here. You need to think about putting that in order to avoid this regulatory impact. So it will give some coaching around that. And we've done that intentionally because we've also done some work around using LLMs and testing those out about how you put your sustainability language into your chat GPTs, co-pilots, etc. And it's come back with some very interesting findings around things like consistency, language, and accuracy. So I'm not saying don't use them, but I am saying use those with caution, because some of them fare better than others, and some of them do some wildly strange things when you're putting the information in. And we've all seen it, haven't we, where we've put information into an LLM, you ask it the same question again, you're going to get a very different answer. And for
Mhm.
this, that consistency piece is really, really key. So it's just some things to think about when you're using AI. I'm not saying don't use it, but you have to use it with some knowledge behind it so that you know what you're getting into. And really what Zena does is to kind of put that clarity and consistency and accuracy into that searching mechanism and then coach you to help you do a little bit better.
That's brilliant. What a fantastic use of AI, and really good advice. I mean, I think anybody who's played around with AI and different platforms can see the varying degrees of sophistication and accuracy that come out of those tools, and they're getting better every day. But having a tool like yours where the consistency is baked in, the regulations are baked in, that's just brilliant. Now, our listeners for Go Green Radio reside in many different countries with varying degrees of product regulations. Helen, help us understand the regulatory framework in which you are working and the regulatory frameworks that your AI tool checks for.
So primarily the regulatory frameworks that the tool checks for currently looks at US, Europe and UK, and Australasia. And the reason we've done that is fairly intentional. So those are the kind of main jurisdictions globally that have the most sophisticated at this point regulation requirements when it comes to how you communicate on sustainability and how you avoid greenwashing. Interestingly, for most of those regulations, they do not differ that wildly between them, but there are some nuanced differences, which is why it's important to understand the kind of different segmentation between them. But overall, those kind of three jurisdiction areas and their regulations really make up around at least 80% of the overall kind of requirements when it comes to communicating on sustainability and avoiding greenwashing. So we've plugged those in as really detailed information and analysis. And of course, there are plenty of other regulations out there that are perhaps more subject specific to a local area. But really, this is about how do we get our users to at least 80% better than where they were before. We're not saying that with this tool, this is going to be 100% foolproof. Nothing is, particularly when it comes to AI. But this is about how do we build confidence with those sustainability teams, those corporate affairs teams, to check their language quickly, simply, give them some coaching and some encouragement to know how to improve. And then at least let's get them 80% more confident so that when they are publishing their material, they know that they are in a really good place to be able to put that content out there.
I'm sure that a lot of our listeners, and many are, corporate sustainability folks, they're probably very excited to hear that you and your tool exist. If a company wants to engage with you and utilize your AI tool, how do they do that? And talk to us a little bit about the kind of process that you will take them through to ensure they're not making illegal claims about their products.
So firstly, what we would do with anybody that we onboard is we give them a free quiz. And that quiz, essentially, it's around 12, 13 questions that really helps you to get your mind thinking about what you're doing currently so that we can make a full assessment as to where you're at. From doing that, we'll give you some guidance on where you are in terms of how sophisticated you might be in terms of thinking around how you're communicating on sustainability and do you have the right checks and balances in place. And we'll give some guidance around that. If then we feel you're a right fit in order to then start trialing Zena, We then bring you on board and we do a month session with you to really start testing out the work, testing out your content, and working with you so that you get used to the system and the platform so that you can start working on it. And interestingly, what we found with the organizations we've been working with is that actually they're starting to use it as a drafting tool. We really thought that when we were building this out, this would be something that people would just put in their final content, all kind of done and dusted, final sense check. But what we found is, particularly with the sustainability teams, when they're being asked to provide information, content, reports, etc., or board meetings, they're actually using this system in which to kind of draft their content as well. So that's quite an interesting one that we're working with some of our initial clients on to kind of test out a little bit more. So that's really the process. And then the idea is that for them, they have that tool on tap so that they can always be checking their information and their data and their analysis and checking that against that regulatory impact. And we find that the coaching layer is quite useful. As I said before, we've intentionally done it as a coaching layer, not to rewrite the content. We know that from talking to a lot of clients, and probably many of your kind of listeners around the sustainability work that they do will know that there are inherent risks with using AI to simply redraft your content, particularly when it comes to sustainability. And it's not something that we would recommend. And that's why we've taken that decision to say, okay, well, let's take all of our 15, 20 years of expertise of how we currently guide our clients and let's put that into a framework to then guide those clients within the AI system. So instead, what you get is the AI coaching you. The AI is prompting you. And actually, as a result of that, we're finding that the teams using it are just getting better themselves. So it's acting as a bit of a training model for those individuals.
Brilliant. Oh, Helen, I'm so excited that we have you on the show. This is really revolutionary. And congratulations to you for being brilliant and putting it together. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but we have so much more to talk about with Helen Neal. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. Our guest today is Helen Neal, the founder of HN Communications, a B Corp, sustainability communications consultancy. And she is talking with us about a tool and a methodology that she has created to help brands get it right when they're communicating their sustainability achievements. I'm going to ask you the flip side of that, Helen. What are some of the things that you've seen brands get catastrophically wrong when they talk about sustainability?
I've seen a lot, as I'm sure probably a lot of consumers and all of us out there have. And I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of mistrust as well. You know, we've seen all of these claims out there, you know, go green, 100% renewable, all of this kind of stuff. And it's really hard, I think, for consumers to really understand where the truth lies. In terms of where businesses get it wrong quite catastrophically, I think it's always done with good intent, but it's not been well thought through. So often, where we've seen things like, for example, the KLM Dutch airline, a couple of years ago, they put out a whole campaign called Fly Responsibly. Now, you might think nothing wrong particularly with that, but actually, they ended up getting fined quite significantly by the Dutch authorities because they were claiming within their advertising and their approach to consumers that it was possible to fly responsibly. And the argument was, well, actually, you can't fly responsibly, and you've not given any data or evidence in order to back up that claim. And that was a moment where this, you know, well-known big multinational airline got tripped up by the regulatory authorities. It's really simple to do. And, you know, it's all done with good intent, but actually they got tripped up from it. So I think it's things like that. There are other things where we've seen, you know, I've seen products being called, you know, net zero or carbon negative. And again, these claims are really hard to justify. A, what does carbon negative even actually mean to the consumer? I certainly don't know. But even if you are making such a claim and you haven't got the data to back it up and you haven't had it verified third party, this is where I've seen brands get really tripped up and stuck from a regulatory point of view. So I think it's these kind of catchy, exciting, uh, grabbing type claims for consumers, but actually they fall down because they don't have the evidence in which to back it up, and it can be quite confusing for consumers. So I think there's a businesses and organizations need to tread with caution when they sit down with their marketing teams to think about how they're building sustainability into their marketing. And I think one of the things that they can do, and where I've seen it work well, is when you bring a sustainability team into the same meeting with the marketing team from the very get-go when they are planning a new corporate campaign. And if you have your sustainability team working side by side with your marketing team from the get-go all the way to completion, that's where I see it work really well.
Hmm. Now, I saw on your website, which I want to give the URL for that because I have a feeling a lot of people are going to want to check it out. It's www.hn for Helen Neal, comms, comms.co.uk. And on your website, you have a quiz, and it helps companies assess their sustainability communications. And I'd love for you to tell us more about that quiz and how it can help companies do a better job.
Yeah, so essentially what it will do, and again, it's just a few questions, and we like to keep these things light and fun. I think, with sustainability, we can all feel like we're not doing enough, it's not good enough. And I'm a real pragmatist, and I think, progress over perfection always. I'm a big fan of that statement, and that's how we try to approach all of our work. So this quiz is not there to make you feel insecure or that you're not doing enough. This quiz is there to look at where are you at today, and it will ask you a set of questions around how you're approaching your communications. What do you think about? What do you include? And sort of really how sophisticated you are in that phase of making sure that you've got the right data verification and processes in place. Once it's asked you those questions, it will give you a score and it will give you some guidance in terms of where you're at and perhaps some quick wins that you might be able to adopt immediately into your work because we want to get everyone feeling more confident and more secure in terms of how they communicate on sustainability. Because we all know if people are not feeling confident and teams don't feel confident about communicating on sustainability, they stay silent. And that in itself and that concept of green hushing carries a huge amount of risk for businesses as well.
Green hushing. I want to hear more about that because I haven't heard that term before. Tell us more about green hushing.
So, green hushing is a phenomenon that I guess has kind of existed in the past couple of years a little bit. And what's happened is we all know the world has changed, right? And things have moved very differently over the past couple of years. We went from a period where many businesses were tripping over themselves to make great claims about their sustainability and green credentials. Um, but that's changed. And we know that business has shifted its language and its communication around sustainability. And with that, some businesses have decided that because of the regulatory environment, because of some of those external pressures, it is actually safer to say less or say nothing than to say something. And so this whole phenomenon around green hushing has been born. So
Mhm.
where businesses feel more comfortable to stay silent, that's what's happening. But of course, we know that carries problems as well
Yeah.
because business is required to talk about these areas. Consumers do expect that, and investors also want to see this information. So you have to find a way in which to talk about this topic in a safe, responsible, but also engaging way. But that's where we are with green hushing.
Makes perfect sense. And that's really not the direction that we want to go. We don't want to scare companies to the extent that we can't celebrate shared values around sustainability with our favorite brands. And speaking of that, I love reading the case studies of success on your website. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what credible sustainability storytelling looks like for a large consumer brand and maybe even some of the common pitfalls.
Sure. I mean, this is where it gets exciting, right? Because I firmly believe that business has the power to drive good in the world. In fact, I think often it has more power to do so than any of our governments. I think in terms of shaping hearts and minds and motivations and what it can do as industries, I think it has a huge amount to give. I think business itself, when a particular brand thinks about sustainability, where they've done it really well is where they've mapped who they are and what they stand for a particular topic in sustainability. Now, I don't think that every brand needs to stand for everything when it comes to sustainability. And we know sustainability has become a huge, broad topic. This is no longer just about CO2 reduction. This is everything from human rights to water conservation, biodiversity, security of supply chain. So, thinking about your brand and what your brand stands for, and where you can find real, authentic alignment within that brand, and we call it brand mapping. So, thinking
Mm.
about your brand, what it stands for, who your consumers are, where you are based, and how that might link to a particular topic. So, let me give you a quick example. In Poland, there is a beer brand called Juba. And this beer brand was a fairly unknown beer brand, particularly even in Europe, actually, a couple of years ago. It has a bison on the front of it. And in Poland, the bison is endangered. And it's endangered because its habitat is being lost. And so a few years ago, the brand looked at its base and said, you know what? We're going to stand for biodiversity and we're going to stand for protecting the bison because the bison is our whole brand image. And so they embarked on a whole campaign and program to build up not only just a narrative, but the actions behind that to protect the biodiversity of forests and woodlands within Poland. And not only did they do that themselves, but they engaged other organizations like WWF to come on board and work alongside them and build up this campaign further. And it has had a huge amount of success, not just within Poland, but it's now become one of the top 50 recognized brands. And so I think sustainability, when thought about carefully, can actually really accelerate a business brand and accelerate the growth of that brand in a really positive way. So I think there are lots of things that you can think about with that, but definitely mapping that authenticity of the brand to a sustainable topic is so important.
I love that story. I love that so much. What a great example. Earlier in the last segment, we were talking a little bit about different teams, breaking out of their silos, sustainability, coming together with marketing and communications. And those three silos can be tough to break down and bring folks together. And I'd love for you to talk about your work to train a whole workforce to communicate a major transition for the brand, like maybe electrification or some other topic like that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, it's very challenging. So let's take electrification, for example, and actually, large automotive brand. I worked for Nissan, we've worked for Nissan, and how you embed the transition to electric vehicles and the link to renewable electricity. How do you do that across a huge global organization? And the truth is, you can't do it all in one go. You do need to have a North Star and an overall global objective. But then underneath that, you need to really think about it from a much more localized bottom-up approach, working with local organizations, local regions, and then building it up from there. So that means all of your communication, all of your engagement, all of the sort of regulatory environment that affects this issue and this topic, both at a really micro level all the way up to a global one, needs to be considered. And of course, the reality is that different parts of a globe are going to be in different stages of that transition. No one area is going to be at the same point. So you have to be able to meet people where they are and take them on that journey, all forwarding up to that North Star point. So it can be complex. And I think understanding the kind of cultural nuances, the political nuances, as well as how this transition actually builds into a global North Star is really the key to kind of get your head around when you're approaching that type of work.
I can see the wisdom in that. And I can also see that that may need to be an ongoing professional development for the workforce. And so that's extremely valuable. I'd love for you to share your frank view of where corporate sustainability communications actually stands right now.
So I think we're in a really important inflection point, actually. If you think about it, and I mentioned before, around up until maybe a couple of years ago, there was a real drive, probably around COVID time onwards, a real drive for businesses to really get behind social and environmental issues. And corporates were almost tripping over themselves to speak on these topics. But when they did so, they were talking about it from, I guess, more of a position of altruism. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. We want to do the right thing by our consumers and by the planet. All very worthy, and I wholeheartedly support it. But I also think, me included, that that world of kind of the sustainability world was also part of the problem, in that we didn't recognize at the time that actually that's just not enough. That might carry 20, 30% of business, but there's plenty that are completely switched off to that language and that thinking. I think what's happened over the past 2 years is that there has been a change in mindset. And suddenly, the topic of sustainability is now very much about long-term business resilience, building a legacy, security of supply chain, security of supply, sovereignty over energy, and all of these topics that we've seen really kind of come to the fore in the past couple of years, and certainly in the last 6 months. I don't think it's a bad thing, and I tell you why. You need to have these topics on the board table and they need to be able to speak in business language. And I think what this has done is put sustainability on the agenda again, but done so in a slightly more nuanced and different way. But the result is still the same. And the reality is that the vast majority of businesses are still continuing to make significant investments into that net zero transition. They might not be talking about it quite so much, but they are still making those decisions and those investment decisions for the long term. So where do I see it heading, to answer your question? I'm genuinely hopeful, and I think we do have a positive outlook. I think that we're in for a choppy ride over the next couple of years, but I do think things like AI has an enormous ability to really transform the way businesses monitor, regulate, have the data available to test and understand all of the work that they're doing, not just within their organization, but across their supply chain when it comes to sustainability. So I think there's a really great opportunity, but I do think there's some caveats to that. And I think, we don't know where the political world will go,
Mhm.
but we do know that we've probably got some challenges still ahead with that. And also AI does carry some challenges around that, and particularly around how AI might get misused for things like sustainability and pushing out misinformation around organizations' sustainability work. So it is things to think about, but overall, I'm hopeful, Jill.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I mean, when you start talking about sustainability, and some brands have done this well, maybe not to consumers, but definitely in the B2B space for a while. But when you start talking about sustainability as a risk management tactic for investors, that just takes it to a whole new level that I think is more likely to be palatable to government officials, regardless of their stripes. And so I'm hopeful too, Helen. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we have so much more to talk about with Helen Neal. So don't go away, folks. There's more Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. So glad that you could all tune in. And if you're just joining us, let me catch you up. Our guest today is Helen Neal. She runs a communications firm specializing in sustainability communications. And we're talking with her about some of the tactics, some of the methods, some of the AI assisted tools that her firm uses to help big brands do it right when it comes to communicating their sustainability achievements. But I want to talk about your company for a second, Helen, because it's a B Corp. And some of our listeners will know what that means, some will not. Talk to us about your decision to take your company in that direction and what it took to earn that designation.
So B Corp is essentially a movement and an opportunity for businesses of any size actually to sign up and go through what is an extremely rigorous process to manage your environmental and sustainability impact. Um, so it's not easy, but the reason we decided to do it is, of course, we're working with big business all the time. We work with NGOs as well. And part of our goal and our mission is to help businesses communicate on sustainability with confidence and with clarity. And of course, we couldn't do that if we hadn't gone through the pain and the challenge that we know our clients go through, right? So we said, you know what, we're going to have to go through this pain with them. We're going to get in the weeds with them and in the dirt, and we're going to feel it. And my goodness, we did, but it was well worth it. And actually, once you're on that road, it's actually a very worthwhile one. It allows you to think about your business in a different way. It allows you to think about how you manage your employees and your customers in a different way. It's a slightly different mindset to perhaps a traditional company methodology. But as I said earlier, Jill, I really believe business can be and should be a force for good. That doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be profitable. Profit is good. It's a good thing, and it's something that you have so that you can reinvest and build and reward. But it shouldn't be the only thing. And I think businesses are on this planet to serve others, to do the right thing. And we see the most successful brands in the world primarily are the ones that are serving their customers and the planet and doing the right thing. I think there are plenty of them out there that are showing that being a good business all round can be successful.
Absolutely. And for those who are listening and thinking, I wonder if we should become a B Corp, what advice do you have for them?
So if you go onto the website, there is again an opportunity where there's a set of questions. There's quite a few. Last time I checked, there was around 70. Don't get disheartened. Take your time. It may take a month, it may take longer, but work through those questions. There's no requirements, there's no you know, issue with you doing that, but just take the test. And at the very least, once you get through that and you've put all of your information and data in, you'll know where you stand because it will give you a score at the end. And in order to become a B Corp, I think you have to score something like over 80, 81, I think, from memory. So depending on where you are on the score, you'll see how close you are to potentially qualifying. But what this process also does is it will highlight to you where you've currently got gaps in your business. So even if you never end up choosing to go down the B Corp route, but you do want to look at how your practices and the way that you operate is sustainable or not, this is a really good tool for you to do that sense check.
Another question for you, Helen, and this is still along the lines of the B Corp decision. Besides all the things that you'll learn and all the gap analysis that you'll be able to do about your operations, what have been the biggest benefits that you've seen of being a B Corp?
I think one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is really understanding the challenge and the complexity of what it means to go through a rigorous, ongoing process of checking against the work that you do, the decisions that you make, and the impact that you have in terms of things like your carbon footprint. Understanding that and understanding that pain is extremely important because you can understand then the challenges that other organizations might face. So that's super important to us. I think the other thing is it's also about the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. Whereas perhaps before you would make decisions without probably thinking too deeply about them. Whereas now, because we have the monitoring in terms of our footprint and that sort of thing, we are much more conscious of the decisions that we make in terms of travel and our carbon footprint. And actually, from doing that, we found we've saved money rather than spent more. So I think it does have some nice economic advantages as well. Sustainability doesn't have to be costly. Actually, sometimes I think it can be a real economic driver for being more frugal and saving more as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My nonprofit organization, the Go Green Initiative, works with school districts here in the US. And that's a big part of our work with them is to bring utility rates down and some of these big budget items in their monthly spend, utilities and different things that they might purchase. If there's a way to avoid some of that usage, you can save quite a lot of money. Um, I wonder though, Helen, is there a tension when you, as the leader of a B Corp, advise and work with non-B Corp companies? Tell us about that interaction.
Yes and no. I mean, I think there's always a nice level of solidarity, right, within the B Corp movement. And if you're a B Corp business, you all kind of understand where you're at and where your values are. Um, but I think largely not. I don't think there's a huge amount of tension. Where I see the tension, and I guess where we make intentional choices about where we work and who we work with, is that I personally never go into an organization where we need to change the mindset of a board or a CEO. So if the CEO and the board are not on board with sustainability, it's probably not the right engagement for us. Because I think it becomes very hard to drive this change within an organization if the board isn't all in on it. And if you haven't got a CEO to champion it, when you do have a CEO to champion it, I see some really incredible results and some really amazing changes that happen. And one of the things I'll just share with you, one of the things that I think is really interesting and quite innovative is I've seen some businesses put the kind of KPIs of the organization's sustainability goals and objectives, not just in the sustainability team, but it's housed across all of the departments. HR, finance, marketing, they all have a requirement to deliver on that. And not only that, some businesses have also linked their business bonuses to those objectives as well.
Um,
So suddenly, and money talks, right? But
mhm.
suddenly the mindset shifts within that board and that leadership team to be thinking about sustainability much more as a business driver. And some have even put a carbon price within the decisions, the investment decisions that they make. So there are tools and mechanisms to think about. And actually, some of those businesses that have done that have again made investment decisions that have ended up not just saving them money, but have generated money as a result, particularly in things like renewable energy.
Well, and the bottom line is, Helen, you're not an auditor. Your company is coming in to help celebrate and communicate achievements, successes, reaching goals, and help companies, um, you know, uh, get excited and get their customers and B2B customers excited about what they're working to achieve. And so it's not as if your company comes in, to inspect. You come in to help them, succeed and feel great about it. What are some examples that you've seen of maybe these kinds of sustainability communications bringing the leadership on board in new ways, maybe creating an aha moment for the board or senior leadership that maybe they had a misunderstanding about sustainability and the role that it plays in the company's bottom line?
I think when a business decision gets made that has been driven perhaps initially by sustainability, that suddenly at the start, perhaps the sustainability element is a problem, is a challenge to be overcome. But when that concept of sustainability gets flipped and suddenly it's viewed as an opportunity, we've then seen something really special happen. Let me give you a quick example. Um, there's a brand in Japan who owns vending machines, with your drinks and that kind of thing out in the cities. And obviously they use energy, they pump out heat, they pump out gases, all of that kind of thing to chill your drinks. And this team was thinking about, well, you know what, in order to reduce our emissions, we're probably just going to have to remove them, which means a loss in opportunity of being able to sell our products on the street. Instead of seeing that as a problem, their R&D team looked at it and said, you know what, maybe we can change the vending machine. So they then set about recreating the vending machine. So the vending machine itself started to take in the air around it, particularly in city environments where it's a little bit more polluted, and take the carbon out of the atmosphere and then capture that within the vending machine while still cooling the drinks. And the waste product from that actually then got used to be able to help build some of the coral reefs down in the South Islands. So suddenly, because they refused to think about sustainability as a stop or a blocker, and they flipped the challenge on its head and said, you know what, we're going to make something from this so that it drives something better. Suddenly, sustainability becomes a real driver for change and business growth. And that for me is where we need to get more of our executives thinking.
I love that story. Absolutely love that example. We're going to take a really quick break, but when we come back, we have more with Helen Neal. So don't go away, folks. More Go Green Radio right after this. Welcome back to Go Green Radio. Today we're talking with Helen Neal, and what a fun conversation. She is a professional with many years of experience helping companies communicate the sustainability goals of their brands and the sustainability achievements of their brand. Um, Helen, I would love for you to talk to us about the gap between what companies know they should do and what's legally safe to say.
Sure. And I think this is a really good one. And I really want to make sure that I'm sharing some actionable tips here. And I think there's one thing time and time again that we've seen in terms of the gap. And even if you choose not to use AI, even if you choose not to check everything, and I wouldn't recommend it either, check everything with your legal teams all the time, it's just not possible. I think there are some things that can help close that gap. So I think the first thing we would always say to anyone who is drafting or building communications around sustainability, whether it's a press release, memo to the board, investor relations, whatever it might be, there are some things to think about. And if you think about these things as a little checklist in your mind, it will really help you. As I say, let's get you to 80%. Nothing is ever 100%, but let's
Mm.
get you to 80% confidence, right? So that you can put more information out. So we call this our impact methodology. It spells impact. But if you think about it in these terms, firstly, does your language and communication have integrity? Is there measurability to the language and the statements that you're making? Can you measure it? Is there proof? Is there real world proof that you can show this has actually happened? Are you taking action in the real world? Are you doing something about it? And if it hasn't worked, what are you doing next? Are you consistent? So is there a consistency thread across all of your communications? If I go onto your website and your social channels, is the same sustainability message there and is it consistent? And lastly, transparency. Are you sharing all of that data? If you're making a claim, can I, as a consumer, find that data somewhere easily on your website, or you're sharing it freely? And has that been verified by third parties potentially as well? And if you think about that impact methodology and those key areas, just 6, when you're scanning and reviewing your content, I promise you that will get you a huge way further than perhaps where you are now. So that's just a really quick tip. And I really do think that that is a very simple approach that we always use when we're working with teams to really think about to close that gap and to build that confidence. And that's really our big mission.
That's ingenious. If you don't mind, Helen, I want everybody to remember the impact. It's help us walk through those letters one more time because I want
Sure.
this to be sticky.
Okay. So we got I for integrity, M for measurability, P for proof, A for action, C for consistency, and T for transparency.
Love it. That's ingenious. Thank you for that. That was a hot tip. I love your company's mission statement. We've been talking about how you help other companies, but I want to give you a chance to talk to our listeners about your mission statement, which is leading the race to net zero with purposeful communications and unwavering commitment to social and environmental responsibility. I love that. I've got goosebumps. Talk to us about that.
I think one of my biggest beliefs, and I come from a world where we worked in, I worked in politics, I've worked in government, I've worked in regulation, I've worked in corporates, and I've had the privilege to be able to work with NGOs as well. So I feel I've worked within all of these remits, and I really think the one thing I notice is that at base level, all of those worlds want to do the right thing. They want to move forward in the right way. I really believe. How we get there may slightly differ, but I think the overall mission is a good one. And I believe business, as I said before, can be a real force for good. So we want to encourage business to speak up and be confident about their mission and their purpose and be able to talk about that with credibility and with clarity. And where I get really excited is when we can marry up the business world with the NGO world as well, because that's when I think something really beautiful happens. And I think we've aimed to build our business on both sides, both from the NGO world and the corporate world, and bringing those two worlds together. That's when I see the real magic happen. That's when I see real purpose and change happen. So we're really on a mission to find those ways where we can, the NGOs can support the corporates and the corporates can support the NGOs, and we all move forward together. And I think that's really where we want to keep pushing and keep helping organizations to achieve.
I'm excited about what you just said because as someone who has been running an NGO since 2002, we have worked with corporate partners on exactly what you just described, where maybe they have facilities in a certain community and they want to be good community partners. In a number of different measurable ways. And it just so happens that the work we do produces those kinds of measurements. And then before you know it, we're part of their CSR report. And I do think that the marrying of NGO work and corporate investment can produce some really positive impacts for communities. And so I want to underscore what you just said 5 times because that I've seen that play out myself.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's such an untapped resource, I think,
yep.
in this world where regulation is requiring businesses to do more and be more specific, the NGO world can really help and does really help the corporate world. And I think the more the corporates reach out to the NGOs and find that alignment, the more success they will have.
I agree. I think that's sage advice. I am hoping that, a lot of our listeners will look at your website, get engaged, with you. And sometimes the reason people do that is because they're just really interested in the founder's story. They love a good origin story. And I would love to give our listeners a chance to get to know you just a little bit better, Helen. So tell us how your career led you to this point with your company.
Sure. So I always wanted to be James Bond. I wanted to be a spy. And I did a master's in war studies after I left university in London. And I went to work for the government. And I went to, don't worry, I'm not a spy and I was never a spy. Um, I decided it was just going to be just not my gig. But I've always been really interested in that intersection between government and politics and business and that world between the two. And I think, I spent almost 25 years now sitting between those two worlds and how we marry up the kind of the social causes and the social drive from government and the need to have the kind of economic drive that comes from business and how you bring those two worlds together. Because I think when you do, I think our whole world gets better. So I worked in corporate for a while once I left government and worked for Virgin. I then worked for Nissan. And I just kept getting pulled into sustainability issues. genuinely, it was not a choice. I work for an airline, so obviously hugely carbon intensive. Worked for Nissan, and I introduced the electric vehicle across Europe. And I just kept getting asked to help in these projects. And I think one of the things about sustainability is it's a great topic to be able to campaign both in terms of purpose and positive change, but also accelerate the world and our economy in a way that is going to take us from where we are today, I think, to what will be a new world order. And we will see that change. I firmly believe that. So I think I've always wanted to be working in something that had that real purpose of change. But I never intended to set up a business. It was accidental. I left the corporate world and wanted to take a break, and it didn't happen. I ended up just taking on more work, more projects, and then built the business from there essentially over the past 10 years. So it's been a real privilege. I wouldn't pretend it's been easy. Sometimes I don't enjoy it. And sometimes I absolutely love it. I liken it to a teenage boyfriend, essentially. I'm in love and out of love with it on a weekly basis. But overall, we are super proud of what we've achieved. And I think it's testament for anyone listening that you can be a small business like ours, and you can work with some of the biggest and best brands in the world now. There is nothing to stop you. And I think we're really proud that we're able to do that.
Helen, it has been an absolute joy having you on the show, and I'm extending an open invitation. Come back anytime and talk with us. You really bring such a breath of fresh air into the world of sustainability communications, your joy. I want to let everybody know one more time where to find Helen's company online. You will find them at www.hn for Helen Neal comms.co.uk. Thank you, Helen, for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us as well. We'll be here same time, same place next week with more Go Green Radio. Until then, have a wonderful week and do something in your life to go green.